Hi, this is Livia Stein, and I'm being interviewed by Jan Wurm, an old friend, and this has been very pleasant and wonderful. And let's go.
Okay, well, just for the record, we are here in the middle of the global pandemic of the COVID-19 coronavirus, and it is October 8th, 2020. And I feel this is a great privilege to be with you, Livia, in your studio and have a chance to really talk about your work. And one of the things that I find so fascinating is the decision to shift from one area of interest and commitment to another area. And with you, this shift from a historical background to art making is really fascinating for me. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the decision via photography into a painterly life to pick up a different mode of existence and contemplation and being in the world, and what led you to image making?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a rather lengthy one, but I'll start with it. When I was in college, I always was attracted to history in the sense that I thought if people understood history, they could make the current world a better place. And I was really addicted to that, trying to see how that would turn out. And I started off at Berkeley studying history and got myself involved in history of India. I started off in European history. And then I shifted to India. It seemed like it was smaller, and it was just fascinating for me. It was the other side of the coin, like so many people in the late 60s, early 70s were just attracted to different ways of thinking and just the other side of the coin that we didn't have here. And so I went to India, and I was like 21 years old. I went with a friend of mine who was from there and lived in the States. And we went for 4 months, and I took my camera. I had a camera, and I took the camera and started taking pictures. And sure enough, when I got back, my father, who was a photographer, said, "Oh, I'll take your negatives. I'll print them for you." And I said, no, I'll set up a little darkroom. I'll do it. Because I had grown up around photography, so I knew a lot about the equipment, and it wasn't that hard a thing to buy some of the materials and get started. So I did when I was living back in Berkeley after, I skipped a part. Well, no, I skipped a part. The part that was really important was when I came back from India, I felt like the primary experience had been so amazing that I no longer was satisfied with the academic secondhand experience of someone else's experience. I used to think that history was reading the literature and the diaries and all the things that compose a history. So it's probably like a socially oriented history, but it was always through someone else's eyes. It was through someone that had the experience, and I hadn't had that experience before. And I had to live off theirs in the study. And then when I came back from India, I realized that what was important was my own experience. It was my own personal firsthand experience of the situation that I really revered, that I went to. And so it started off with photography, and I enjoyed photography for a number of years, and still do, but not in that same way when I was schooled in it. I was schooled in a very technical way in photography. We started off with 4x5 cameras and did the whole, everything. And I gradually became a painter. I would say that part of the reason that I became a painter was because I was so attracted to the freedom of it. I took some painting classes when I was in art school studying photography, and I just I loved it. I loved everything about it. I loved the tactility. I liked the decision making. I loved the openness. And so gradually I kind of moved away from photography. I was in graduate school at the time, and I felt like I reached a dead end. It was like I was doing some pieces that I really enjoyed, but there was nowhere to go for me. I just felt like I couldn't continue along that route. So I switched to painting, and I really, in many ways, was a self-taught painter. Even though I took classes, I never was an undergraduate in painting, taking all the drawing classes and seeing perspective and this and that. So then the other thing that happened that was significant was a friend of mine who was going to CCAC at the time said, "Oh, I have to take you to the print shop. There's this thing called monotype, and you're just going to love it." And so I went with her, and I did all these small prints, and I was smitten. I was totally in love with my prints. I had them all over the shelves of my apartment, and I was just crazy about it. And gradually, I made that changeover, and I've never regretted it. I feel like I'm much more the personality of someone who wants to paint than I find that the technical stuff of photography a little bit restrictive, and working through a lens and looking through the eyes of a lens all the time, it's not like the primary experience again. So that's what really got me.
So just in terms of not the mechanics of the hard camera versus the soft gooey paint or inks, but in terms of formal terms, in terms of framing and focus and attention, have you found that the photography years have had an influence, or were the languages so divergent that you made a clean break from
I think
your viewpoint?
I think that it's more like a clean break. It was like a way of feeling like my life had come to an end in that kind of observation, and that I was going to try to live it. And the other thing is, it's like I realized that with painting, it was something that was all mine. It was like a discovery that I had something in my life that was all mine. And that was very important to me. I never had that before as a kid growing up. And so that's what really propelled me. I think that some of the methodology of composition and lighting and all those ideas are similar, but I think that the way I paint, it's not like photography. It's not like you can completely jump off a cliff in painting, whereas in photography, you're still held there. At least I was still held there. I saw the work of some photographers at the time that I really liked, but I just didn't know how to get there. I remember the Starnes twins, and they did some very interesting combined work with photography and painting and drawing. But my background in photography had been so formal and so overly educated in terms of technique that I didn't know how to break out of that in photography. Whereas in painting, I knew what I could do.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting, and I think this is amazing how you've made these shifts. And I think the printmaking and the monotype is another huge shift also. And I was wondering how, since you actually go back and forth between painting and the press, how you handle the transitions in scale from the really large monumental to the very intimate on paper, how you shift between these whole universes that you paint and create to a much more intimate dialogue, a kind of the viewer and the subject, this in and out that you have. Could you talk a little bit about those changes,
Yeah.
those shifts?
I learned early on that I could not catch both in the same piece. I couldn't put the priorities of what was in a painting into a print. It just simply didn't work because everything was so different and the materials were different and the size was different. So once I had let go of that expectation, I really had an easier time. I always felt that the paintings or the prints are trying to catch up to each other, that I would have an insight in one that area and that I would try to integrate it into the other area. But it was always like a catch-up game or chasing your own tail. So I think with the monotypes, and actually I've been doing a lot of pronto printing, which is, it works from your own drawings. I draw a lot at during the operas, and then I make prints from them. And I find that very satisfying. I find that there's an immediacy to the printmaking that's hard to get in a big painting, where you have to sustain an emotion or a thought for a couple of weeks, a couple of months. You have to be patient. You have to say, I'm not going to resolve this today, so I might as well just enjoy it. And you have no hope of resolving this whole big painting because you've hardly put the paint on it yet. And although you paint it in your head, I don't know about you, but I feel like when I sit down in my chair, I actually can paint the whole painting in my head. And it's like it never gets painted. I had a studio that had beautiful light, and I would sit in this chair and I would envision everything about this painting. But then it's like when you started painting it, it was never the same as what you envisioned. And you had to be willing to let go and go that other direction and let the paint lead you.
Mm-hmm. Definitely a different sense of time. You know, in your head, you paint really fast. It's like it's there.
Yeah.
As fast as you can think of it, it's there.
Yeah.
And I too, I didn't have a chair, but I started every morning waking up and not even waking up or opening my eyes and sort of reviewing what was there and where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do, so that it was just a bother in between to like get up, brush teeth, dress, and get to it.
It's true.
But yes, it was there was a lot in the head with the eyes closed, and it all moved very easily, unlike
it did.
canvas.
Yeah,
Sure,
it
for sure. I mean, I have to say that, well, first of all, there's so many things about your work that are unique, your color, your palette, your vitality, your energy. But the fact that you use animals in a way that is so extraordinary and so outside of any other genre, they're not fairy tale, and they're not sweet, and they're very human. And how did you come to the decision to use animals as a cipher?
I think it came on its own. I think it came from my early study of a lot of Indian art and Indian literature and Indian mythology. And it just felt like it was not foreign to me. There was this no problem with a bird head being on a person's body. There's just no problem with it. It was like perfectly natural. It worked okay. And that's where I came from. It just seemed very natural. I went to India several times over a period of about 20 years. It was my go-to place. It really, can't explain it other than to say that it was very special for me. And I learned tremendous amount of stuff every time I was there. And I just felt like there was something that was working for me, something very special. And I wasn't religious, wasn't that. I didn't hang out at ashrams and things like that and meditate. It was just a different edge of things that really was satisfying to me.
One of the aspects of your printmaking and your bookmaking, I should say also, because you make these delightful books that are quite wonderful. And, you know, as they open up, just reveal so much. But they also incorporate India, not just in the color, but directly in the materials that you bring back, in the cloth and the fabric and the sequins and the every embellishment. Could you talk a little bit about that tactility that you bring to the work?
That is, I used to sew when I was growing up, so I was fabric oriented. My mother had this big cupboard. She knew someone in the fabric business. They would give her all these ins. So I'd open up this big cupboard when I was in high school if I wanted to sew something and pick out a few yards of fabric. So I was always very tactily oriented. I knew the difference between what a wool was and what was a cotton and what was synthetic. And when I went to India the first time, it was like a total parade of color. And the women wearing saris were just so beautiful to me, and the brightness of the color and the boldness of it. It just, I was hooked. I was just really mesmerized by it. And I think that that's always stayed with me, that love of color. Although I do work in black, and it's really a relief sometimes to not have to make the color choices because you have all these decisions to make. And I feel like my palette in color has evolved and changed. You know, some years it was blue and the other years it was yellow, and now I use a lot of whites. And I don't like contrast as much as I used to. I used to like things that were brightly contrasted. And so that kind of thing has changed, but my enjoyment of color is still there.
The color is really, it's riveting. It really grabs and holds you very strongly. But there's also another aspect that I find very compelling in your work, and that is the sense of layering and working and development, that it's not image making so much as finding an image.
Yeah.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about that process of how your work developed.
Yeah. You know, there's this experience I had recently with painting, where I was looking through this whole sketchbook and I couldn't make a decision on which of the drawings that I wanted to work from. And I thought, well, this is ridiculous. You have more than enough material here to go with. And I said, I'm going to just do what I might have done as a student. I'm going to paint with no ideas at all. Because I really felt like for a long period, it was having some kernel of a shape or something got me started. And it's usually a drawing or, you know, a picture of an Indian miniature or a European master drawing, with something that was my catalyst. So I couldn't find my catalyst, and I was just starting to paint. And so the trade-off with that is that I ended up painting for half a day and then erasing the paint for the other half of the day. It seemed like I couldn't overcome that formlessness at that point. And I used to feel that I could do both. When I was younger, I felt a confidence that I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and no matter how I jumped, I wasn't gonna fall, that I was going to be able to pull it off. And I think that the comfort with the monotypes helped me feel that way, because I taught and I was very spontaneous in my way of teaching. And so I think that helped me. But it's harder now because I just don't have that confidence. It's like the paintings turn out better ultimately when they're done, but bringing them to life is much more of a task than it used to be. I used to be able to just, you know, what's another canvas? You know, it's like, but it's really, it's a little more difficult.
I think that's really an interesting point, because I found that when I look back at work, the paintings where I struggled are actually the ones that are the most interesting to me now.
Yeah.
I look at them and really they somehow, they were, it's not that the ones that just came as a gift. I mean, there are always those that come as a gift and you go, wow, suddenly it's there.
You feel like
That was
you're in a
so easy.
role. Yeah.
Yes, you know, it was a gift. But, and some have aspects that struggle, and you know from the very beginning that there's something there that needs a resolution and you have to fight for it. And somehow those are really engaging paintings and hold.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that, you know, it brings us back to our earlier conversation about Philip Guston, why we admire his work so much. I think there's this way of finding a truth, a personal truth in a painting that makes it a painting more than just a picture. And for those of us who really care about that experience in painting, it's very important. And it's like you can have I have more confidence now in leaving a painting unfinished for a week and staring at it, and then having some sort of epiphany when I'm on my way to do the laundry, you know, of what I want to do with this painting. But the choices they're more difficult now. They're more, it's like I have much more I put much more into the work than I think I did when I was younger. I think when I was younger, they were more decorative and maybe brighter and more interesting. They sold whatever with art consultants and galleries and such, but they didn't give me what I get now from the painting. I get some version of my own truth that comes through ultimately.
I think like life at this stage is also much more complex, that we might have thought that after all these decades, things would be easy, decisions would be easy, we'd see it all. And we struggle with the very basic things that we did when we were very young.
Yeah, I know. It's like Matisse talking about there's nothing more fearful than a blank canvas. And it's still the same way.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad that you have blank canvases to fill with new work, and everyone's really looking forward to seeing, you know, more work and more exciting developments and new things. And I feel so privileged. Thank you for letting me join you today in the studio, Livia.
I really enjoyed it, and it's very special for me to discuss the things too, because it doesn't always come up, rarely comes up. Okay.